What do Ukrainian pilots hunting Russian drones have to do with a World War II Spitfire, a Nazi cruise missile, and a daredevil Aussie who was either a genius or completely insane? And what happens when you're chasing a deadly weapon packed with explosives at 400 miles per hour and you run out of bullets, pulling a maneuver so dangerous that getting it wrong means instant death? This is the story of the summer that changed everything Britain knew about air defense, and a technique so crazy it's still being used 80 years later. And like all great stories, ours begins with a sound nobody had ever heard before. June 13th, 1944. 1 week after D-Day, Allied troops were finally pushing into France. The war was turning. Victory for the first time in 5 years felt possible. And then, at 4:25 in the morning, London woke up to a strange noise. It wasn't the dreadful yet familiar sound of the Nazi heavy bombers. Londoners knew that sound intimately from the Blitz. It wasn't the roar of Spitfire engines scrambling to intercept. This was something else, a rhythmic, angry, buzzing noise. Something like a motorcycle engine being tortured in the sky, or a giant wasp with a death wish. The men at the British anti-aircraft batteries scrambled to their posts and opened fire. Their 40mm Bofors guns filled the sky with tracers. But this thing, no cockpit, no pilot, just a stubby fuselage with short wings and a jet of flame shooting out of its tail, streaked overhead like it didn't even notice. By the time the gunners swiveled their weapons around, it was already gone. And then the engine cut out. There was a moment of terrible silence. That silence would become the most feared sound in London. Because when the buzzing stopped, you had about 12 seconds before the explosion. The bomb hit Grove Road in Bow, just 2 kilometers from the Tower of London. The result? 6 people were killed, 30 were injured, and 200 were made homeless. Britain didn't even have a name for it yet. They'd learned soon enough that the Nazis called it the V1. But to those on the ground, it was more commonly known as the flying bomb, a deadly vengeance weapon that was mass-produced and now pointed at London. So, what exactly was that strange missile that just showed up uninvited to terrorize 8 million people? Well, the V1 was relatively small, just 27 feet long, with a wingspan of about 17 feet. It was built mostly of welded steel, not aluminum like a normal aircraft, which is going to matter a lot later in this story. It carried a 1,870-pound warhead of high explosive in its nose. And it carried no pilot, no man inside, no chance to bail out, no possibility of reasoning with it or scaring it off. This was, for all practical purposes, the world's first cruise missile, a flying robot designed to kill. Here's how it worked. A pulse jet engine, basically the simplest jet engine ever invented, pushed it to about 400 miles per hour. That distinctive buzzing, that was the engine firing about 50 times per second. Air comes in through shutters, fuel ignites, explosion shoots out the back, shutters reset, repeat 50 times a second. In addition, it had 2 gyroscopes to keep it level. A small propeller on the nose, basically a mechanical odometer, counted how far it had flown. When it hit the preset distance, a mechanism triggered. The elevators locked into a dive, the engine starved from fuel, and the bomb fell. Simple, cheap, terrifyingly effective. And the most dreadful thing was that the Germans knew exactly where to aim, because they had spies in London reporting where each bomb landed. Or at least, that's what the Germans believed, but we'll come back to that. Within 72 hours of that first attack, the Germans launched hundreds more. On the night of June 16th to 17th, they sent 244 V1s at London in a single coordinated assault. And Britain discovered something terrifying. Everything they'd built to defend London was designed for the wrong enemy. The anti-aircraft guns? Useless. Those 3.7-inch heavy guns that had helped defeat the Luftwaffe in 1940 were built to track high-altitude bombers visible for minutes at a time. The V1 came in at 400 miles per hour, just a few hundred feet off the ground. By the time a gunner spotted it, tracked it, calculated the lead, and fired, it was already past him. The radar stations? Blind. The whole system was designed to track formations of 50 bombers approaching at predictable altitudes. A single small target screaming in at treetop level? The data arrived minutes too late to matter. The RAF scrambled everything they had. Spitfires, the same aircraft that had won the Battle of Britain, dove to intercept. And here's where it got embarrassing. The standard Spitfire of 1944, with its Merlin engine, had a maximum speed of about 362 miles per hour in level flight. The V1 cruised at 400. Do the math. The fighter that saved Britain in 1940 literally could not catch this flying bomb. The only way to intercept was to spot the V1 from above, dive on it to build up speed, and try to get a shot off before you ran out of altitude. You had seconds. The RAF did have faster Spitfires. The new Mk14 variant with the Griffon engine could hit 450 miles per hour, fast enough to actually chase down a V1 in level flight. But in June 1944, there weren't nearly enough of them. Most squadrons were still flying Merlin-powered aircraft. The planes that could catch the bombs were spread thin. The planes that couldn't were everywhere. And in that first week, more V1s hit London than in some of the worst raids of the entire Blitz. Meanwhile, at RAF Newchurch in Kent, an Australian pilot named Kenneth Collier was watching this chaos unfold from his cockpit. Collier was 23 years old. He'd joined up in 1942, trained in Australia, shipped to England, and ended up flying Spitfires with No. 91 Squadron. By June 1944, he'd already shot down one V-1. He knew the drill. He understood the problems better than most. He knew what he was up against: steel skin that shrugged off machine gun rounds, explosions that could kill you if you got too close, and ammunition that ran out mid-chase while the bomb kept flying toward London. And somewhere in the back of his mind, an idea was forming. A stupid idea, the kind of idea that either wins you a medal or gets your name read out at a memorial service. We'll come back to him. But first you need to understand why shooting these things was so much harder than it sounds. Imagine you're a Spitfire pilot in June 1944. You've spotted a V-1, you've managed to dive on it and catch up. You're now flying alongside 1,000 pounds of high explosive at 400 miles per hour. You squeeze the trigger, your .303 machine guns open up. Rounds slam into the V-1's fuselage. And nothing. The bullets just punch small holes in that steel skin and keep going. The V-1 doesn't even wobble. It's not like hitting an aircraft. There's no pilot to wound, no fuel lines in convenient places, no control surfaces that matter. The thing just keeps flying. Okay, switch to cannons. Your Spitfire has 20mm Hispano cannons, much more powerful. You line up the shot, squeeze the trigger, watch the shells slam into the V-1's body, and now you have a new problem. If those cannon shells hit the warhead, and at this range, there's a real chance they might, that 1,870 pounds of high explosive detonates about 50 feet in front of your face. Pilots reported being slammed by shockwaves so hard they nearly lost control. Some flew through the debris cloud and came back with their Spitfires shredded. Others didn't come back at all. So you're stuck with an impossible choice. Get close enough to guarantee a hit and risk the explosion killing you. Stay at a safe distance and probably miss in while the bomb sails on toward London. And there's another problem nobody talks about in the movies: ammunition. A Spitfire's cannons carried 120 rounds per gun. Sounds like a lot, right? At 600 rounds per minute, that's about 12 seconds of trigger time. In practice, pilots fired in short bursts, 1 to 2 seconds each. That gave you maybe 5 to 7 bursts before you were empty. And that's assuming both guns worked. Jams were common. Now here's the math that kept pilots awake at night. A typical diver patrol might encounter 3 or 4 V-1s. If you're lucky and your aim is good, you might kill the first one in 2 or 3 bursts. The second one, you're already rationing. By the third, you're counting rounds in your head. By the fourth, if there is a fourth, you're watching a V-1 cruise missile fly toward London with nothing left to stop it. Now you're flying alongside a deadly explosive weapon heading for a city of 8 million people. You have the fastest fighter in the RAF, you have the flying skills, you have everything except bullets. What do? Do you let it go and watch it hit London? Do you ram it and die a hero? Or do you try something no one's ever done before? To understand what comes next, we need to understand how the V-1 stayed level in the first place. Remember those gyroscopes? That was the key to everything. A gyroscope is basically a spinning wheel that resists any change to its orientation. Spin it up fast enough, and it wants to stay pointing the same direction no matter what you do to the thing it's mounted in. This is basic physics, angular momentum, conservation of rotational energy, all that good stuff. The V-1 had 2 gyroscopes. One controlled yaw, keeping the nose pointed in the right direction by moving the rudder. The other controlled pitch, keeping it from climbing or diving by adjusting the elevator. A magnetic compass provided the actual heading reference toward London. The yaw gyro just kept the missile stable around that commanded direction. If the V-1 started to drift left or right, the yaw gyroscope sensed it and a pneumatic servo moved the rudder to correct. Nose creeping up or down, the pitch gyroscope commanded the elevator the other way. Together, plus the natural stability of the airframe, they kept the missile more or less on course. This system was elegant and simple, and crucially, it was designed to handle small disturbances. A gust of wind, a bit of turbulence, minor fluctuations in engine thrust. The gyros could correct all of that automatically, continuously, keeping the V-1 flying in a narrow envelope. But here's the thing about gyroscopes. They have limits. They can only correct so fast. They can only handle so much deviation. Push the V-1 beyond a certain angle, saturate the correction system with a disturbance bigger than it was designed to handle, and the gyros max out. They can't recover. The V-1 departs controlled flight and goes into a wild dive or spin, and a cruise missile that can't fly straight tends to end up in a field instead of a city. The question was, what if you didn't shoot it at all? What if you got close enough to touch it? One pilot was about to find out. It was around 10:40 p.m. on June 23, 1944. Still light. Around that time of the year in England, the sun doesn't set until nearly 10. Flying officer Kenneth Collier, an Australian pilot with No. 91 Squadron, was on diver patrol in his Spitfire Mark 14, hunting V-1s over the Kent countryside. He'd already shot down one V-1 earlier that day. His ammunition was running low, and then he spotted another one, crossing the coast near Beachy Head, heading inland toward London. Collier dove to intercept. His Griffon engine roaring, he closed the distance, watching the flame from the V-1's pulse jet grow larger in his windscreen. He got into firing position, squeezed the trigger. A short burst. Maybe a hit, Witnesses said the V1 seemed to slow slightly, and then nothing. Empty. Out of ammunition, the V1 kept flying. London was straight ahead. Collier was out of options. He could follow it, watch it hit, and report the impact to ground control, or he could try something no one had ever done before. What if it could be tipped? He pushed the throttle forward and pulled alongside the V1. Close, terrifyingly close. He flew up on the right side and had a look at it, as he later described, close enough to see the rivets in its steel skin, close enough to feel his Spitfire being buffeted by the turbulence coming off the flying bomb. Collier knew the V1 was guided by a gyroscope. Pilots had been briefed on that much. And somewhere in his mind, an idea formed. What if he could disrupt that gyroscope by physically interfering with the missile? He didn't know if it would work. He had no test data. No engineer had briefed him on gyroscopic saturation limits. He just had the idea, the desperation, and maybe 5 seconds to decide. His Spitfire's wingtip slid closer to the V1's wing, feet, then inches, and the first attempt was cautious. Collier later said he gently touched the elevator with his wingtip. The V1 wobbled. But the gyroscope sensed the disturbance and corrected. The bomb rolled back to level and kept flying. Not enough. Collier pulled back, steadied himself, and repositioned. This time he knew what to do. He got his wing under it and gave it a final push. Harder, more forceful. A deliberate, aggressive roll. The effect was violent. The V1 flipped. The gyroscopes tried to correct, but the deviation was too large, too fast. The control system couldn't recover. The missile tumbled and dove straight into a field near East Grinstead. The explosion rocked the landscape, an empty field, no casualties. At that moment, he'd just invented a new tactic. Not because he'd carefully analyzed the physics. Not because he'd observed some telltale sign in the V1's flight, but because he was desperate. He understood the basics of how gyroscopes worked, and he was willing to try something insane, fail, adjust, and try again. After Collier's crazy maneuver, word traveled fast. Within days, every squadron flying diver patrols knew about the Aussie who'd tipped a V1 with his wingtip, and once they knew it was possible, pilots started doing it themselves. Joseph Berry, a squadron leader with number 501 Squadron, became one of the RAF's top V1 killers with 59 confirmed victories. Most were conventional gun kills, but when the ammunition ran out, and it always ran out, Berry used the tip. The technique, as pilots described it, worked like this. You fly alongside, match speed, slide your wingtip under the V1's wing. Not touching, at least not at first. The airflow alone, the vortex spinning off your wingtip, creates a pressure difference that destabilizes the V1. If that's not enough, you make contact, gentle, controlled. Then you roll your wing up, physically levering the V1 past the point where its gyros can save it. It sounds almost methodical. It wasn't. And flying in formation with a cruise missile at 400 miles per hour requires absolute precision. The V1 didn't care if you made a mistake. It was already dead, just a robot following its programming. But you, a slight misjudgment, a moment of turbulence, your wingtip catches theirs the wrong way, and you're cartwheeled into the English countryside alongside a warhead that's now definitely going to explode. Pilots called it the nudge, or the tip, or if they were being honest after a few drinks, that bloody stupid thing we do when we run out of bullets. By August, it wasn't just a trick anymore. It was a known practice technique spread across multiple squadrons. Pilots briefed each other on it between patrols. And it wasn't just propeller aircraft. When the Gloucester Meteor, Britain's first jet fighter, was rushed into service against the V1s in late July, at least one Meteor pilot used the technique. Flying Officer Dixie Dean brought down a V1 on August 4, 1944, using wingtip interference when his guns couldn't get the job done. The first jet versus cruise missile kill in history, achieved not with missiles, not with guns, but with a wingtip and sheer nerve. But Collier and Berry and the other pilots were only one front in this war. While Spitfires chased V1s over Kent, Allied bombers were hitting launch sites in northern France, and ground forces were fighting to overrun them, and in the shadows, British intelligence was running a different kind of operation. Remember those German spies reporting where every bomb landed? By 1944, every identified German agent in Britain had been captured and turned. The entire spy network Berlin trusted was being run by British intelligence through the double-cross system. The star asset was a Spaniard codenamed Garbo, so convincing the Germans gave him an Iron Cross. When the V1 campaign started, Garbo fed them carefully skewed impact reports. He over-reported hits in the suburbs and north, under-reported strikes in central London. Berlin saw a pattern. Their bombs were overshooting. They adjusted their aim shorter, which moved thousands of warheads away from the densest parts of the city and into open countryside. One man, feeding false coordinates through a channel the enemy trusted, may have saved more lives than any single fighter pilot. So, how did it all end? By late August 1944, Allied ground forces had pushed far enough into France to overrun the launch sites along the northern French coast. The last V1 battalion evacuated on 29th August. On the 1st of September 1944, the final V1 was launched against Britain from French soil. The main campaign against London was over. Here's what it cost. The Germans launched roughly 10,000 V1s at Britain. About 8,000 were aimed at London. The defenses stopped roughly half. Tempest fighters shot down about 638, Mosquitoes got 623, Spitfires destroyed 303, P-51 Mustangs and others accounted for another 176. Anti-aircraft guns, finally repositioned and equipped with proximity-fused shells, knocked down well over 1,800. Even barrage balloons, basically big tethered obstacles designed to snag V1 wings on steel cables, caught around 200. And wingtipping, official RAF records document at least 16 V1s destroyed by wingtip interference. The real number was almost certainly higher. Many pilots just reported destroyed without specifying the method. But roughly 4,000 V1s got through. Over 6,000 people were killed. Another 17,000 injured. Hundreds of thousands of homes were damaged or destroyed. Entire neighborhoods in East London were flattened. It was the last great air assault on Britain, and it was stopped not by one thing but by everything at once. Faster fighters, better radar, proximity-fused anti-aircraft shells, massive bombing campaigns, an intelligence deception that literally rewrote where death fell, ground forces advancing to capture the launch sites, and a handful of pilots crazy enough to reach out and touch a flying bomb with their wingtip at 400 miles per hour. So, why does any of this matter now? Well, during 2022, when Russia started launching suicide drones at Ukraine, those autonomous, pilotless, designed to fly themselves to a target and explode? Different technology, modern engines, GPS guidance, but the same basic concept as the V1, a flying weapon that doesn't need a human to kill once launched. Since then, Ukrainian forces have had to develop multiple ways to deal with them. Mobile fire groups with machine guns and small arms have been responsible for the majority of successful interceptions. Radar-guided anti-aircraft systems like the German Gepard, electronic warfare to jam their navigation, interceptor drones that chase them down and ram them mid-air, fighter aircraft when the situation allows. The methods vary depending on what's available, where the drone is, and how high it's flying. But in at least one documented case, a Ukrainian pilot did something that echoed what RAF pilots had done 80 years earlier. And so in 2023, a Ukrainian pilot flying a Yak-52, a propeller-driven trainer, was filmed intercepting a Russian Z-16 drone. Instead of shooting it down, he flew alongside it, matched its speed, and used his aircraft's wake and wingtip to destabilize the drone and knock it out of the sky. No missile, no gun, just aerodynamics and nerve. The video went viral. People asked, has anyone ever done this before? Yes, 80 years earlier, an Aussie pilot in a Spitfire, out of ammunition, facing a Nazi cruise missile heading for London. While this is not the primary way Ukraine defends against drones, not even close, but the fact that it happened at all shows that the improvisation from June 1944 wasn't just a one-time trick. When conventional methods aren't available, and you understand aerodynamics well enough, you get close and you tip the balance. That's the story of the summer of 1944, when Spitfire pilots ran out of bullets and reached out to touch death instead. 80 years later, the drones got smarter. The physics didn't change, and neither did the courage required to get that close. But as you know, aviation history is full of moments like this, where one aircraft, one raid, or one decision changed everything. If you've liked this video, make sure to hit the like and subscribe buttons so you don't miss the next video. And I have one more crazy story waiting for you on screen. Just click it, and I'll see you on the other side.